Hey everyone, it's Rob here. Just a quick one on fever. Let's talk fever. Fever as opposed to hypothermia. So at the top of the food chain we have what we would call pyrexia, which is literally any temperature over 38.3. Now I know 38.3 seems a little high from what you've probably been taught. 38.3 is kind of like an internationally accepted standard. But your colour-coded observation sheets, your between the flags or your QADS forms or your Muse forms or your CUTE forms or whatever forms you're using around the country, tend to have human body temperature pegged up to about 38, depending on the type of form that you're using and the hospital that you're working with or the health service that you're working in. Those goalposts are going to be ever so slightly different. They tend not to be the same across the country. So let's say 38 just to make everyone happy, but it's actually 38.3. But let's say 38, right? If your temperature rises above 38, we're going to call that pyrexia. Now, if that temperature is intrinsic, meaning the elevation in body temperature has come from an internal process going on in your body, like an immune response to an infection, then we would call that a fever. While you have a fever, you might be referred to as febrile. Okay, let's have a look at the other side of pyrexia. The other side of pyrexia is hyperthermia. So that's a temperature that is over 38, where there was an external environment that actually caused it. So if you fell asleep in the sauna, or if you were working out in the hot sun, my God, it's hot and muggy in Queensland today. So, working outside, doing mowing and stuff like that, if I wasn't drinking and catching shade and looking after, keeping cool, I might overheat, and that would be referred to as hypothermia. If I'm hypothermic and my body temperature starts to rise, that's when we start looking at a whole host of heat stress related disorders. And you've no doubt heard of heat stroke and heat exhaustion and heat cramps, sort of a whole family of heat related disorders. But let's come back to fever. Fever is intrinsic, comes from inside your body. And so when I've got a fever, it's usually because it's because I've mounted an immune response. Now, the immune response, we'll simply refer to that as inflammation. Inflammation is part of our natural healing process. I must mount an inflammatory response to heal any tissue that's injured. So if I have inflammation, it's because I have tissue injury. So if you recognise fever sits at the top of if you wanted to draw a little diagram, fever sits at the top, it's a symptom of inflammation. Inflammation is a process of tissue healing that happens when I, next level down, have an injury. And injury can happen from many, many things. I can have injury from an autoimmune disorder. I can have an injury from infection, so some sort of pathogenic bacteria or viral infection or fungal infection can cause tissue trauma, tissue injury. I could have a trauma. I could have a burn. I could have hypoxia. Any of those are going to cause tissue injury. And when I have tissue injury, I'll mount an inflammatory response. But some inflammatory responses, like those we see with infections, pathogens that invade our body and provide us with tissue destruction as a result of part of that infective process, then we mount a thermogenic response as part of our immune system's way of dealing with that infection, with dealing with that bacteria or dealing with that viral infection. So it's actually your immune system that does it. It's not a bacteria that gives you an infection. It's not a virus that gives you an infection. It's actually white blood cells, particularly the white blood cells that are called monocytes when it comes from the blood, and macrophages when monocytes move out of the blood and into your tissues. Macrophages, they change name, they're called macrophages. And what these macrophages and monocytes do is they produce a chemical, a cytokine. And that cytokine instructs the hypothalamus, a small thermostat that's inside your brain, in an area of your brain called the hypothalamus. There is a thermostat that sets your body temperature at or around 38 degrees. So what if something chemically altered that and asked your brain to make it hotter? Well, that's exactly what your macrophages are doing. When you have an infection, to work best and most efficiently, your macrophages want that body temperature to rise. So they will constantly be sending chemical messages to the brain to say, make it hotter, make it hotter, make it hotter. Until such time as your body has reached that temperature where macrophages can do their work, their optimum work, and their job is really to clean up debris when you've got an infection or injury to tissue. There's a lot of debris to clean up, right? So macrophages move in, they clean up the mess, and then they tell the brain, all right, we're all done here. Temperature's all good. You can bring the body temperature back to normal, and the fever will break. They'll break their fever. So fever is your friend. It enhances the immune response. If you're still with me and you like this style of education, I'd love to get a comment or two from you. I'd like to know, what other topics do you want me to tackle? My name is Rob Timmings. I'm from ECT for Health. I'm a nurse educator, and I just love to break down that complex stuff. See you next time, guys.